Now, I think one of the most underestimated parts of the biography of Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and this is really something that I want to focus on here, before we get to fitna and those types of things and what happened there, the sad stories. All right? Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi, he said something really beautiful about Ibn Umar. Abu al-Hasan, I'm talking about the late Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi, the great scholar, rahimahullah ta'ala. He said Ibn Umar had two special traits. Hubb al-Sunnah wa hubb al-Masakin. He loved the Sunnah and he loved the poor. He loved the poor. And it's very unique and it's very noticeable in the life of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. And loving the poor, is that a praiseworthy trait? Of course it's a praiseworthy trait. It's something the Prophet ﷺ used to ask Allah for. Hubbul masakin. Rasulullah ﷺ used to make dua to Allah for having the love of the poor. Right? So Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he has that, and it's something the Prophet ﷺ obviously had. And so this is a really powerful narration, and this goes back to the effect of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu on his son. In Musnad al-Imam Ahmad, there's an authentic hadith that Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu never sat at a table to eat food unless there was an orphan sitting with him. He would bring an orphan to his house daily. He would not eat his food without an orphan sitting with him, without someone from the Aitam sitting with him. SubhanAllah, how beautiful is that? Hubbul masakin, loving the poor. And he used to, really have empathy for people. He did not like to see people that were underprivileged. So there was a man who was, I just want to show you how broad this is. There was a man that kept on having daughters. So he wasn't having any sons. And from Jahiliyyah, obviously, they used to kill their daughters. So he wished that his daughters were dead in front of Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. فَغَضِبَ Ibn Umar got so angry with him, and he said, أَنْتَ تَرْزُقُهُنَّ? Are you the one that provides for them anyway? And we'll take care of them. If you hate them, we'll take care of them. You shouldn't talk about your daughters that way. And he used to free slaves, and not just any slave. Nafi' radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said that أَنَّهُ أَعْتَقَ وَلَدَ زِنَا وَأُمَّةً. He freed a child of adultery and his mother. Okay? So he used to free slaves that weren't even so righteous, because that's something that's very common amongst the Sahaba, which is freeing righteous slaves. But Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he had compassion. He would free those that were righteous and those that weren't righteous. He had that compassion for people. Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he hated animal abuse. I mean, just to show you how extensive this is. Animal abuse was something that he was noted for hating. Mujahid, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he forbade people making their animals fight each other. Dog fights and those, he actually forbade that. He made it haram. Sa'id ibn Jubayr radiallahu anhu, he narrates, this is a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. He says that one time Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, me and him were walking, and we passed by a group of young men that tied a hen, and they were shooting arrows at it. So when Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu came, when they saw him coming, they all ran away. And Ibn Umar, he screamed out, he said, "Man fa'ala hadha?" Who did this? Inna Nabiyya sallallahu alayhi wa sallam la'ana man fa'ala hadha. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam cursed people who do stuff like this. So Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, even when it came to animals, he had that compassion. He didn't want to see that type of thing. Salim radiallahu anhu, he says, and so these are just some of the stories of his sadaqah, of his charity. They're really very beautiful stories, subhanAllah. Salim radiallahu ta'ala anhu said that Abdullah ibn Umar never turned away a beggar, even if he had nothing to give them. He would go to another beggar that he'd given money to, and he'd ask them if he could borrow some of what he gave them, and he'd pay them back. So if he gave a beggar money, and then another beggar came and he didn't have anything to give him, he'd go back, he'd say, "Can I have half of that, and I'll pay you back the other half." Then he'd go, because he didn't want to turn people away. And he said one time there was a man who had abras, he had leprosy. And obviously his disease was, he had bad skin and things of that sort, and it made him repulsive to the people. And he came to Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu's his house, and he had wahshatul mandhar. He didn't have, he looked scary. And Ibn Umar had nothing to give him. He only had food on his plate. And Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he told him to come in his house, and they ate from the same plate. That's just from his rahmah, his mercy to the people. He said that one time, me and him, Nafi' says one time we were riding upon a camel, and this was his favorite camel. And all of a sudden, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu said, which means to stop, right? Stop the camel. The narration says, So he stopped the camel, he got off of it, he told Nafi' to take the saddle off of it, he covered it with a cloth, he cleaned it up, and he went and he gave it in sadaqah to the next person that he saw. His favorite camel. When Nafi' asked him why, he said, because I saw myself gaining an attachment to it. You know, like imagine, subhanAllah, you're driving, I'm not telling you to do this, but you're driving your car and you say, hey, look, you can take my car. I don't even know who you are, but just take my car. That was the extent of his sadaqah. There are a few beautiful stories I'll mention here. Hisham ibn Yahya, he says, جاء سائل إلى عبد الله بن عمر. جاء سائل إلى عبد الله بن عمر, that a beggar came to Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu and told him, أعطني دينارا. Give me a dinar. Now a dinar is not a dirham. You got to understand currencies. A dinar is like 6 grams of gold. A dinar is a lot of money. A beggar usually asks for a dirham and they're satisfied. Okay? So Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, as soon as the man said, أعطني دينارا, he went and he got a dinar and he gave it to him. Okay? فلما انصرف, so when the man went away, قلت له تقبل الله منك يا أبي. So this is Salim now, the son of Abdullah ibn Umar. He said, تقبل الله منك يا أبي. May Allah accept from you, O my father. He was impressed with his father that you went and you got a whole dinar. فبكى وقال. So Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, when his son said that to him, he started to cry. And he said, لو أضمن أن ربي قبل مني في دنياكم سجدة أو قبل مني في دنياكم صدقة تمنيت الموت. He said, if I was sure that Allah accepted from me in this world one sajda, one prostration, or one charity, then I would wish for death. ثم قرأ إنما يتقبل الله من المتقين. Allah accepts from al-muttaqeen, from the pious. Right? So when his son tells him, تقبل الله يا أبي, MashaAllah, you know, that's a beautiful thing that you did. I'm proud of you, Dad. You know, you gave all that money to that beggar. Then he said, you know, if I knew that Allah accepted it from me, then I wouldn't even want to be here anymore. Abdullah ibn Ja'far radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Abdullah ibn Ja'far, he came to Abdullah ibn Umar and he gave Abdullah ibn Umar, or he offered to Abdullah ibn Umar 10,000 dinars for Nafi'. Now, Nafi', I kept saying Nafi', 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 and it's all about Nafi'. Nafi' was a slave. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he took him, Nafi' just wanted to be a student. So he just wanted to stay in his house. And Nafi' became a great scholar in and of his right. He lived in the house of Ibn Umar, he became a great alim. So Abdullah ibn Ja'far said, I'll give you 10,000 dinars, which is unheard of. That's crazy, right? Slaves would be bought, you know, back then, Jahliya, 10, 20 dinars, right? The story of Bilal, right? 100, that was crazy, 10,000 dinars. I'll give you 10,000 dinars to let Nafi' come stay with me so I can learn from him. So Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, give me a minute. And he went and he asked his wife, ما رأيك? What do you think? So she said, ماذا تنتظر? What are you waiting for? اذهب بسرعة, go. Hurry up before he changes his mind. And Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, فهلا فعلنا ما هو خير من ذلك? What if we do something even better than that? So she said, what is it? So he called Nafi'. He said, اذهب أنت حر لوجه الله. Nafi', you're free for the sake of Allah. Nafi' said, I'm not going anywhere. But he set him free. He said, no, I'm not gonna take any money I'm not gonna sell him like a slave or anything of that sort, or take money. No, he said, Nafi', just go free for the sake of Allah. Nafi' said, I just want to stay with you. So Nafi' continues, but he's a freed slave. Technically speaking, he's not a slave. He just decides to live with Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, to stay with him for the rest of his life. But Nafi', what he says is, Abdullah ibn Umar used to have a particular liking to freeing slaves. If Ibn Umar had money, he would go find slaves and he would free them. Okay? And this is a beautiful characteristic to have of a person. And when he says that's so funny, he said, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, particularly if he saw a slave that was close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we said Ibn Umar even freed an illegitimate child and his mother and so on and so forth, Azaniya. But he said that if Ibn Umar saw a righteous slave, then he'd really want to free him. So he said that the slaves used to act righteous whenever they'd see Ibn Umar because they knew that he was like that. So he said that there would be slaves that would go and they would make sure that they were in a saf al-awwal, they were in the first line whenever Ibn Umar would come to the masjid, and they'd make sure that he saw them for a couple of weeks, and when Ibn Umar saw them that way, he'd go and he'd work and he'd try to get money so that he could go free them for the sake of Allah. So he said, I told him, Ya ibn Umar, innahum yukhadi'unak. They're deceiving you. All these people are deceiving you. Like, he's freeing hundreds of slaves. All these people are deceiving you, right? They just know that you're like that. So all these slaves just come and they pray in the first line and they, make extra sajda and read extra Quran. So he says, فَضَحِكَ ibn Umar. Ibn Umar, he laughed when I said that to him. And he says, مَنْ خَضَعْنَا فِي اللَّهِ إِن خَدَعْنَا إِلَيْهِ. He said if they're deceiving us to make us do something good for the sake of Allah, then let them deceive us. That's okay. That's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's still a good action. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever frees a slave for the sake of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would free his entire body from hellfire. So this is a beautiful hadith, and this is something that Ibn Umar used to act upon. Anytime he had money, Nafi' said he would go and he would purchase the freedom of slaves, particularly the righteous slaves. And by the way, you know what Nafi' says? And this is kind of fast forwarding a little bit. He says that by the time Ibn Umar died, he had freed over 1,000 slaves. And he said, subhanAllah, he said at his janazah, there were over 1,000 slaves, freed slaves, that were crying and remembering the favor that he'd, making dua for him because he was the one that went and freed them. SubhanAllah, they say Islam came with slavery. SubhanAllah. This man by himself freed over 1,000 slaves. He wasn't even a rich man. Anytime he had money, he would use it to free slaves. Okay? So this is a beautiful characteristic of him. There's another really funny story from his wife. Now, his wife, one time Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu got sick. So his wife came to him and she said, ma tashtahi, what do you want? What kind of food do you want me to make you? He's sick, he's at home, he can't really move. What kind of food do you want me to make you? So, قال أشتهي حوتا. It would be nice if I got some fish. So she went and she made fish, and she went and she purchased a fish. And you don't get much fish. You don't eat seafood in the desert back then much, right? So it's actually a luxury to eat fish. So Ibn Umar just wanted to eat fish. So she went and she got a fish and she cooked the fish for him. And she said that just as she served it to him, very lovingly, a beggar started knocking on the door. And he screamed out, Assalamu alayka ya Abdullah, ja'i'un, at'imni. I'm hungry, feed me. Assalamu alayka ya Abdullah, I'm hungry, feed me. So Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he handed it to his wife and he said, give it to the beggar at the door. And she responded and she's like, look, Anta marid, wa hadha ghada'uk. You're sick and this is your lunch. وَطَلَبْتَهُ وَاشْتَهَيْتُ. And you asked for it and you desired it. And I made it for you, right? This is special. This isn't just any meal here. So she says, فَهَلَّا صَرَّفْنَاهُ بِدِرْهَمْ. What if we just tell him to go away? We just give him a dirham and we tell him to go away. Again, a dirham will make him satisfied. Just give him a dirham and he'll go away. He'll go buy some other food. So he said to her, احملي له طعاما. Just carry it and give him the food and put it in his hands. And he recited, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. What Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, that you will not achieve Jannah until you spend from that which you love. So this is something that I desire, so take it back. So she really wanted him to eat the food. So what did she do? She took the food and she gave it to him. Then she said, can I buy the food from you? Can I buy the food from you? So the beggar said, sure. So how much do you want? So he said 2 dirhams, all right? So not just 1 dirham, 2 dirhams. So she went and she got 2 dirhams and she gave it to him, all right? Then she brought the food back to Abdullah again, and the guy knocked on the door again. And he said, well, I'm still hungry though. You gave me the money, but I'm still hungry. Can I have a little bit of the food? So Abdullah ibn Umar said, just give him all of the food, right? Give him the whole fish, right? So subhanAllah, that's again, part of his charity. Remember, multiple narrations, subhanAllah. Nafi' actually has one between himself and Abdullah ibn Umar. It's narrated in Muslim Imam Ahmad. Nafi' says that one time I bought him a cluster of grapes for 1 dirham. And as soon as I put the grapes before him, a beggar knocked on the door once again. So you can tell that it's very frequent that beggars just come to his door over and over and over again. So when he knocked on the door, Ibn Umar just looked at him. He knows the look. It's like, all right, take the grapes to him. Nafi' said, eat a few of them first. So Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu said, no, give him the whole thing. So he said, I went out and I gave the beggar the grapes. And he said, then I followed him and I told him, will you give me back the grapes if I give you a dirham? So he said, sure. So I took them and I brought it back to Abdullah. He said, then a few minutes after, the same guy came and he asked for sadaqah. So Ibn Umar said, give him the grapes again. Same story with the wife. So I said, just eat a few of them. And he said, no, just give all of them. So I did. He said, so I went to him. And he said this happened 3 or 4 times. So the guy got 4 dirhams out of me. Every time I gave him a dirham and took the grapes and gave it back to Ibn Umar, he asked for it again and I gave it back to him and I got a dirham. So I got angry with him and I told him, أَلَا تَسْتَحِي عَلَى نَفْسَكَ. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Until the guy went away, and then finally I gave him the grapes, and he ate the grapes finally after I gave him 4 dirhams, right? Just so that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu wouldn't give them away. And so there are many, many narrations about this, that, you know, he once he was given 22,000 dirhams as a gift. Maymun ibn Mahran says he was given 22,000 dirhams as a gift. And he said he didn't leave the gathering until he gave it all away in sadaqah. So subhanAllah, that was something that he had, hubbul masakeen, the love of poor people, to a point that they were always at the table with him. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says, Shaka rajul ila Nabi ﷺ biqaswati al-qalb. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ and complained that his heart was hard. فَأَوْصَاهُ أَنْ يَمْسَحَ رَأْسَ الْيَتِيمِ. He told him to caress the head of an orphan, right? To accompany an orphan, take care of an orphan and caress his head, care for him. It softens the heart. And so Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu always kept these people around him. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, just to show you the effect, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah ta'ala, when he was dying and the foreign emissaries came from around the world, he said, I just want to be surrounded by al-aytam. I want to be surrounded by orphans because they soften the heart. So this is a tradition from Umar to Abdullah to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz once again. There is one more famous story of sadaqah that some of you might have heard about because it became famous over the last year. There was a man, right, there was this sheep herder, it was on YouTube, it went viral on YouTube, all over the place, right? That there is this sheep herder and there's a guy that pulls up to him in a car and he tells him, look, give me one of the sheep, give me one of the sheep and we won't tell the owner of those sheep. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. What are you talking about? He tells him, I'll give you 100 riyas. The guy can barely speak, subhanAllah, he's a Bedouin. Right? And he's just like, no, 100 riyals. He says, what am I supposed to tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? He's like, 100 riyal fil qabr. What's 100 riyals going to do for me in the grave? This is all on camera. The guy's got a cell phone video. You can go look it up on YouTube. It went viral just a few months ago, subhanAllah, in the last year. And so he says to him, I'll give you 1,000 riyals. I'll give you 10,000 riyals. And the guy just keeps on refusing. And so they show that video, then it goes to this narration of Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Nafi' says that one time Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he went and there was a slave that was herding sheep. And he said to him, give me one of them, I'll pay you, behind your owner's back. So the man said, Ana mamluk wa mu'taman. He said, no, he said, I'm a slave and I've been entrusted with this. And so Abdullah ibn Umar says, قُلْ لِلْمَالِكْ أَكَلَهُ الذِّئْبُ. Tell the owner that a wolf ate it. Just give me one and tell the owner that a wolf ate it. He said, no. He said, I'll give you more. I'll give you 100. He said, no. He says, قُلْ لِلْمَالِكْ أَكَلَهُ الذِّئْبُ. I mean, look how Ibn Umar is testing this man. He says, just tell the owner that a wolf ate it. And then he responded, وَمَاذَا أَقُولُ لِلَّهِ. And what will I say to Allah? Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said to him, كَلِمَةٌ أعتقتك في الدنيا وأسأل الله أن تعتقك يوم القيامة. That this was a word that freed you in this world, and I ask Allah that it frees you on the Day of Judgment as well. And he went to the owner and he bought that man's freedom. SubhanAllah, but he was testing that man, and SubhanAllah, this is something that went viral all over YouTube, where you can find that there was this shepherd, right, who's being tested, and then it goes into a narration. And the man is from Sudan, and subhanAllah, it got so famous that the Sudanese government actually put out a party for this man. They invited him to the embassy, and look how beautiful. They gave him 10,000 riyals. They gave him the 10,000 riyals that he said, no, I'm not going to take 10,000 riyals. They gave him 10,000 riyals, subhanAllah, because he stood his ground and he showed that integrity.